Welcome to the podcast series of the College of Education and Integrative Studies. My name is Jeff Pass. I'm the Dean of the college here at Cal Poly Pomona, and our guest today is Dr. Alvaro Huerta. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Dr. Huerta, you have many projects going on, and we'll spend the whole time talking about it. But one primary interest that I think would be something that would appeal to the general public is your work with DACA students, with the Dreamers. Tell us what you're doing.
Yes, this is something that's very important. Actually, when I was a student at UCLA many moons ago, we were organizing issues about immigration and undocumented students. But at the time, it wasn't something that was very popular like it is today. So we were at UCLA, and the chancellor decided to cut the financial aid for undocumented students because they would actually give, under Leticia A, they would give financial aid. So we ended up having a hunger strike. And for us, it wasn't an issue of whether they're undocumented or not. We didn't see it that way. It was because we're student activists. It was more like they're our friends, they're people that we know. And while we were doing this hunger strike, it lasted over 10 days. I wasn't part of the hunger strike because I'm too skinny. Okay, I get dizzy between lunch and dinner, but I was one of the organizers. And because of that, some of the friends that we were organizing with, they themselves were undocumented, and we didn't even know.
So previously, if you were undocumented, there really weren't serious repercussions as when you were part of the university system.
Right. And it wasn't an issue. People weren't, it wasn't some, it was actually better because there was no publicity. So when people were undocumented, you wouldn't know, or they wouldn't even say anything. So now that the undocumented students have received a lot of attention, and I think a lot has to do because of them themselves. Like, I see the Dreamers, the undocumented students, I see them as like the freedom riders of the 1960s, the African American and white students that went to the South to integrate the South and to fight against segregation and to fight against Jim Crow and things of that nature. So a lot of the movement with the Dreamers, it didn't come from the activists or the lawyers or scholars like myself. It came from them themselves in fighting and demanding their rights and coming out and saying, I'm undocumented, I'm not afraid. I was born in this country, so I feel I have a privilege that I take advantage of, in the sense that I say whatever I want, utilizing my free speech rights, and nothing's going to happen to me. Right? So I can fight and I can argue against these policies that impact undocumented, and nothing's going to happen to me. I mean,
compared to the students themselves who could be deported.
Right. I mean, I grew up in East LA. The worst they could do is deport me back to East LA. So for me, it's not an issue.
Right.
But for them, doing the same thing, it's now they're exposing themselves. The consequences are grave.
So by playing a role, you can help to protect those students.
Yes.
By taking on the mantle of leadership and you taking the hits rather than the students themselves. So what exactly are you doing for these young people?
Well, in the classroom and overall, whenever I speak, I try to argue this framework of looking at immigrants not as immigrants, because immigrant has become a dirty word, but as human beings, and trying to make them feel that they have a place and that nobody in this country is illegal. Nobody in the world is illegal. I mean, it's just a status, but that's not who you are. So for me, the first thing is to educate people and to try to focus not on what separates us, but what brings us together, like our commonalities. Like, I was born here, like I said, my brother was born in Tijuana, but it was just by chance. I'm not more special or because I was born here than him. It was just by chance. I was born here and he was born there. So a lot of our status has nothing to do with anything, but by chance you were born in a certain part and then now you're here. So for me, a lot of the work has to do with how we frame the argument, how we make people feel. And when I talk about this in class, in general, about immigration, mental health, violence, poverty, things that I've experienced growing up, and do it in a way where people should not be ashamed of it, then the first thing that happens is people open up. Sometimes they'll say it in class or I'm documented or in my office hours. So you're able to deal with the issues like at a human level. And then also creating an environment that's conducive to undocumented students here at Cal Poly.
So what would that be? What would make the environment more conducive?
Well, I think Cal Poly is doing a great job already
Mm-hmm.
because we're diverse. Like in certain areas of the country where the schools are not as diverse, undocumented students, they don't feel welcomed, or they feel, because let's say they might be the only Latino or Latina. Speaking of Latinos and Latinas, because there's other groups, they feel a sense of alienation. But in Cal Poly, because of our diversity, I think documented students, they don't have that same sense of anxiety that they do uh, elsewhere.
But that's not an accident. President Coley
Right.
and the chancellor of the CSU has taken steps to create that environment.
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. And I think that is the type of work I do, and I applaud the work that yourself and President Coley and the chancellor in creating an environment where our diversity is embraced, our differences are embraced, and not just in race and class, but also sexual orientation, religion or lack thereof, and then also the question of citizenship or lack of citizenship. So that's one thing that I do. The other thing, I write a lot about immigration. I write a lot about. I have a new book coming out on defending immigrants, on Latino and Latina immigrants. So part of it is to make the argument that we should treat immigrants first like as people on the move, people that are driven. I mean, immigrants in general are driven, self-motivated. They have all the characteristics that it takes for this country to get ahead in the future.
And this is not something that's new. This has been going on for
Right.
centuries,
Right.
for millennia, really. People have moved around from place to place. It's only recently that it's become more of a political issue driven by xenophobia,
Right.
perhaps?
Xenophobia and also the color of their skin. I mean, where they're coming from. I mean, if you have Canadians coming over, it's not considered a problem. I mean, we're not talking about building a wall between Canada and the United States, or if they're coming from Switzerland or France. And then there's also the money issue, right? So if you come with a lot of money, if you're an immigrant coming from any place of Latin America, if you're rich and you come with a lot of money, you're not seen as a burden. You're actually welcomed in this country. The doors are open because they want that investment. I mean, one of the most brilliant men and women of today is Elon Musk. I mean, he has his other issues going on with personality, but he's brilliant
Mm-hmm.
and he's an immigrant.
Right.
I mean, in these ideas, I mean, with Tesla, with the SpaceX and solar panels, these brilliant ideas come from immigrants, and we need to embrace that.
Right.
And we need to cultivate the ones that exist. So when I see young students today, like the dreamers at Cal Poly, and some that don't qualify, the Dream Act, and some that don't qualify for DACA, I see them as like, if we treat them right, if we give them what they need, that's the next Elon Musk right there.
Right. So the immigrants as a whole, with one or two success stories, can really cover all of the possible expenses that they would bring along with them.
Right.
Although I think people underestimate how much immigrants actually contribute to the economy.
Right.
That's not a story that's well told.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. And then that's another thing I talk about is try to debunking a lot of the myths about immigration. Immigrants don't qualify for federal assistance, or they don't qualify for Medicare, Social Security. So they're being taxed and they're contributing to the system. They're giving, but they're not getting back. It was Bill Clinton that prevented immigrants with this Welfare Reform Act from uh, not allowing immigrants to qualify for these type of programs that I benefited from when I was a kid, or my family did. But we see that even though immigrants contribute greatly to the country, from Latin America, from anywhere from Mexico to Honduras to Haiti, very entrepreneurial, very self-reliant, uh, very community, family-oriented. It's not just about them; it's about their families too. So a lot of them, when they're here, and we see this with the Irish, the Italians, when they first arrived, let's say in the 1800s, they send money home. So it's that sense of community, the sense of being family oriented that Americans don't have. Because in America, it's all about the individualism. And the immigrant, it's about the family, it's about the community. And sometimes that family, the community might be a burden to the student, right? Because let's say you have a DACA student or first generation student, parents are immigrants. So a lot of times they have to drop out or they have to work extra to support their parents, or they're women, Latina, for example. Sometimes they have to go back and help take care of their kids and of their siblings, and like these sometimes these gender roles. So they have the dreamers of today, the document students have a lot of burdens that and obstacles that they have to overcome. So for me, when I see the fact that they're here and they overcame all these obstacles, it says a lot about them.
Right. So you have a unique position here at Cal Poly Pomona in that you're not just a professor of ethnic and women's studies in my college, but you're also a member of the architecture and environmental studies college. So what role do you play in contributing to public policy related to this issue?
Well, for one, is just the arguing in writing policies and in not policies, but writing social commentaries. Also, the issue of advocating for just laws and looking at cases for like street vendors, and this is something we talked about in the last interview. How when immigrants are being criminalized for behavior that's licit. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with selling tamales or tacos or hot dogs. With the bacon, maybe you get a heart attack. But other than that, there's nothing wrong with that type of behavior. But you need activists, you need scholars, you need people to force cities to regulate versus criminalize. And this is something that was part of in California, like street vending has become legalized, or there's laws that prevent cities from criminalizing that behavior. So that was one of the campaigns that I was part of at a public policy level. And one of the things that I try to teach my students and also teach other faculty members, because they need to learn as well, is that to use their privilege as university students and the knowledge that they're gaining and put that into practice in a constructive way. And one of the ways to do that is to advocate for this type of legislation that is able to legalize street vending. Or there was a certain time when immigrants, undocumented students, for example, they paid outstate tuition even though they're residents of California. So it had to there was a certain law that passed and a certain legislation, Marco Fireball passed away, that had passed the law that allowed for students to receive an in-state tuition. So those are the type of issues that I'm interested in, like at the public policy level, to support legislation that supports immigrants, that supports families that are part of immigrants, because immigrants are not these like marginal actors. They're not like these people that are okay. The immigrants are over here and the citizens are over here, and we're all part of the same community.
Right. And I noticed that you've done some recent work, advocating for STEM education, or science, technology, engineering, and math education. Tell us about it's a personal crusade for you.
Right. A lot of the things that I do they're kind of related to my own background. I come from a large Mexican family. There's 10 of us. I have 10 uncles and aunts and 100 first cousins. Half of my family at one point were undocumented. Half of them were immigrants. Half of them were citizens. And one of the passions that I've had growing up, I mean, I was the first to go to college in my family. Not just in the nuclear family. We're talking like about 1,000 people here. Went to college, went to UCLA in 1985. That was a long time ago. And grew up in housing projects. And the only reason I went to college, because I was good in math. That was the only reason. When it came to reading and writing, I was behind. I wasn't reading at grade level, not because there was any issues with me, but I wasn't being taught at the inner city public schools that I attended. We weren't required to do papers or anything like that, homework.
There were lower expectations.
Yes. No, I never. The only paper I was assigned from K to 12 was a 2-page paper, double spaced. and I was only assigned one book, Steinbeck. It's like luckily they had a lot of pictures, so I was able to get through it. But because I was good in math, it just came natural to me. It wasn't something like I studied. It just something came natural. That allowed me to. That was like my ticket out of the projects or the housing projects that I grew up in. It's kind of like the boxers or the football players. That's like their ticket out of the ghetto or the barrio. For me, it was math. Um, but when I was in high school, there was this competition, and it was a calculus competition, and I wasn't supposed to be in it. It was supposed to be someone else, but they got nervous and they quit. So I was like the bench player, the backup. So I ended up winning the competition. It was part of the Mesa group at Occidental College, but they cheated me. I got robbed.
How did you get robbed? What happened?
Well, what happened is our school was Wilson High School in East LA, and then the other school was Franklin. And the judges from Franklin High School, they cheated. They gave the first prize to their students. So when it was announced about the competition, it was me and another student. We weren't even mentioned. So a month later, the person in charge of the Mesa program at Wilson announced that Alvaro and the other student were the winners of this calculus contest, and I was like shocked. I couldn't believe it. So I felt bad because they had robbed me of my 15 minutes of fame. That,
You could have had the glory of going up on a
right?
stage
Yeah,
and
the
shaking
award.
hands. Yeah.
But so I ended up going to UCLA. I did apply to Cal Poly Pomona in math, and then San Luis Obispo too, and Cal State LA. But because UCLA had a football team, I wanted to go to UCLA because that was the only thing I knew about college back then. But it didn't. We're talking 1985. I was Mexican American, Chicano. Literally, the classes at UCLA, the pre-calculus classes, you're talking about 300 students, 400 students
In a section.
in a lecture.
Yeah.
The lecture.
Big auditorium.
Big auditorium. In the calculus, 400 students.
Wow.
I was the only Chicano of the entire 400 students at one point. And in the entire college, there was probably like 2 of us. And I was the only one that came from welfare and housing projects.
And your explanation for that is partly because of the K-12 education system.
Right.
That just wasn't pushing math hard enough and helping students succeed.
Right, definitely. And not motivating, the low expectations. So that environment, what I experienced, it made me feel, you feel alienated, you feel like you don't belong. So I dropped out of that program and went into history. I also became an activist, so that had something to do with it because we're protesting against apartheid in South Africa, right, against U.S. involvement in Central America.
We don't see a lot of mathematicians on the front lines of social movements.
Right, and then it's hard to keep up with the calculus and being protest at the same time. So that experience of me not fulfilling my original dreams of being a mathematician, 30 plus years later, I reflected on that and I wrote about it. And part of it was just to tell my story because it's an interesting story, but also to shed light on the fact that the universities and the institutions itself, higher education in public K-12, they need to do a better job in recruiting Latinos and Latinas and other racialized communities.
And you have some very, I think, provocative ideas for going forward. What are some of them?
Well, some of them is that we should give the university professors service credit and to go into the elementary schools to teach them so that they can see role models at that level. We should be able to fund graduate students that are Latinos and Latinas, especially working class, to get PhDs in math. And then with the idea of going back to the community, teaching at the high school level, at the university level. There's studies have shown that when you're taught by someone that looks like you, then you're able to get more motivated. You're able to see yourself in the position. Right? So for a long time, and it continues to the present, we see also discrimination against gender in terms of women in math and engineering and science. But places like Google and Facebook and all these different Silicon Valley in general, it's very male dominated. You don't see that many women, especially at the higher level. You don't see that many minorities or African Americans, Latinos and Latinas. So I feel in general we need to diversify these fields, especially to reflect the population that we're serving.
So how do you respond to critics who would say that that would be race-based favoritism?
That's part of the argument. The other argument is the quota. There's like, well, we're going to argue for quotas. It's actually it's more than anything is these type of programs is to undo a system of racism throughout history that has prevented minority communities to compete at an equal level. So one thing, and we see this as a big scandal right now with education. With these affluent parents paying tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars for their kids to go to places like USC. I went to UCLA, so I don't think highly of USC, but and you see that part of it is that the fix is in at that level, but also the fix is in for privileged parents because it's with people with means send their kids to private schools that allow them to get better education,
Or hire tutors?
hire tutors, and then smaller classrooms. You have your prep tutors for the SATs, for the personal statements, and then have the advantage that parents went to college. So you have all this modern. Already, there's a disadvantage.
Right,
So for me, these type of programs is to the playing field is not leveled. We need to level it,
right.
and we need to like raise all boats. And at this point, it's like this. And I seen it even with my own son and the advantages that he has with my wife, graduating from UCLA and getting her master's and being an educator herself, and us passing down that knowledge to him. And unfortunately, if you're working class, if you're an immigrant, if you're from poor rural communities, you don't have that, and that puts you at a disadvantage. So we have no choice as a country, as institutions of higher education, to invest in these type of programs to create a full opportunity for everybody.
Right. And the society is already expending a lot of money in education, in improving the quality of the schools. So if this is a technique that works, in which we can raise the performance of students who weren't doing so well,
Right.
it sounds like a good investment.
Right. Yeah, and I admit I have a bias. My bias is people like the way I grew up. For me is we have to start at the bottom. We have to start at the people that have limited resources, uh, limited opportunities. The schools that they attend are overcrowded, underfunded. And for me, whether you're a poor white in Appalachia or poor African American in Detroit or Latina in Southgate and in Southeast LA, these are the type of individuals and their families that need that extra help because of the inherent uh, institutional barriers that they experience that makes it almost impossible to get to the university.
Right.
Like where I grew up, graduating from high school was like it was like going to college. Like no people didn't graduate high school.
It was a great achievement.
Yeah, we had like we killed a pig, we had like a mariachis and everything because nobody graduated high school. So when I was growing up, the people that I looked up to, like the older people, they all dropped out.
Did you have people persuading you not to go to college?
No, it wasn't like that. It was just there was no one that looked like me that went to college. So I didn't see there was no model to emulate. I mean, even the teachers at my elementary school, they were all nice and I liked them. I mean, my sixth grade teacher, Miss Rose, I used to call her Miss Ronald McDonald because she had red hair.
I'm sure she appreciated
Yeah,
that.
yeah. She didn't know, but she was my favorite teacher of all time. But all the kids that went to that school, they were all from the projects, from housing projects, Ramona Gardens in East LA. Everybody was poor. We were all on welfare. 95% there was no father in the household. So a lot of the times it was like going to school was like not getting beat up. It was like how to avoid that. It wasn't about learning. It was and and the teachers were nice and they had good intentions, but they didn't have any expectations, for us because they saw the previous generation, struggle to get in, like I said, just to get in a high school diploma.
So are there urban planning solutions in addition to educational solutions?
No, definitely, definitely. I mean, we don't have as much But we have some urban planners that get into the area of education in terms of the schools, uh, and looking at like also the built environment, and how to even produce or invest in schools where you have green spaces where it's healthier to for kids to learn. Like the school I went, it was all asphalt. You know, there were no trees.
Because I know so many people, when they're choosing a community in which to live, will look at the school
Right.
system and its quality as a very important factor.
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. Like in Santa Monica, for example, you can go to there's a certain area of Santa Monica is very affluent, and you can go to buy a home that's $2-4 million, and the schools are great. But it's like a private school, but it's a public school.
Hmm.
But because of the area, you're literally buying into like one of the best schools in the area. Or if we go to San Marino here, not that far from us, like the average home is $4 million. They have one of the best high schools in the country. But to buy into that neighborhood, you have to be a multimillionaire. So in reality, your kids are getting that type of education.
So you get what you pay for
Yes.
to some extent.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to be brilliant or successful or anything, but it gives them that leverage, that it gives them an advantage already. It's already inherent within the system itself. In the more affluent communities, even when the schools are public, you have the campuses are beautiful. There's green spaces. The percentage of kids to the teacher, the ratio is low. So it's more conducive learning environment. And that's the type of school I send my son to, because I didn't want him to experience what I experienced. And I didn't want him to figure it out the way I figured, like the hard way. And then I had an immigrant mother that pretty much, she was so driven and aspirational, and she pretty much kind of like inculcated in myself that I could do whatever I wanted to do. So it's a lot of factors, you know. And then the fact that I've been skinny all my life, um, my gang application was rejected. I couldn't defend the neighborhood. So if I would have joined a gang, forget it. It would have been. So there's a lot of factors, uh, that kids that grow up in these type of neighborhoods, environments that they have to deal with, that prevents them from excelling, or prevents them go to the university, or prevents them from going to the university straight out of high school, like I did. So I'm more like the exception or the rule, but I want to turn that equation around.
So what recommendation would you make to policymakers who are looking at this issue?
Well, I would see that they look at these communities not as problem communities, not as communities where there's hopelessness, or looking at blaming the victim, right? So sometimes policymakers, or the idea would be, wow, they're just not driven, they just don't value education. I mean, poor immigrants value education more than anybody,
Right.
because they know that how hard it is for them as immigrants to work in this country. And I tell this to students, and I just gave a talk at UCLA to some kids from Santa Barbara. And all immigrant kids, all poor kids, will have heard this lesson that an immigrant parent would tell them at one point in their life, is that I want you to work hard so you don't have to work like me. I want you to work hard in school so you don't have to suffer like I do. And it is that mentality. And I think that we need, as the policymakers, the scholars, need to tap into that.
And I think we see it in our CSU system, in which they're constantly trying to make college more accessible,
Yes, yes.
both by expanding the number of seats in the university, opening up online and hybrid courses, Saturday, weekend,
Right.
evening sessions, so that folks have an opportunity to move up the economic ladder. And there's evidence that CSU does a good job of it.
Oh no, I think so. I'm a big supporter of CSU, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah. And the CSU is proud to have you among its brethren.
Okay.
So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.